I'm very curious to hear your story because I know you have two children, right? Who
Yep.
are who are older now, right? But yeah, why don't we just get started? I want to hear your story, kind of how you came to your ADHD diagnosis and what was happening in your life where you were like, I really need to check this out.
Yeah, definitely. Yep, yep. I'm really happy to talk about all of that and my journey, which has been interesting.
And your
As
fiance
it
also
is.
is also neurodiverse as well, right? Yeah, okay.
Yes, so we're all ADHD. Me, my kids, my fiance, my mom, like everybody. Just yeah, it's a bit chaotic.
Well, there's no surprise there. um, uh, yeah, okay. So why don't you tell me? I guess we'll start with your story and your sort of diagnosis story.
Yeah, so my kids were diagnosed first, like so many. The kids got diagnosed, and I before the kids got diagnosed, I was already working in the sector. Um, so I kind of knew for a long time that I possibly had ADHD. Then the more I got to know and the more research I did, the more I knew I definitely had ADHD. But I actually didn't get diagnosed till I was in my mid-30s. And I knew I was expecting it. So I wasn't shocked when I got the diagnosis. But what I did find was just the amount that it put me at ease. All of a sudden, all those things that I had found so difficult, or things that I always thought were just bad personality traits, and I just thought, oh, it's just me. I just can't do this, or I just, you know, um, I always felt like I was not mature enough or not capable enough or things like that. And so when I got the diagnosis, to know that it wasn't just me and there was a reason and an explanation behind it all just made just this enormous difference. And the amount it increased my self-esteem was really mind-blowing.
Yeah, I know. I feel like I talk a lot about that with my guests, how, that when I was diagnosed, I wanted to shout it from the rooftops because it was so revelatory. It was so incredible to just feel like, oh my goodness, there's an explanation for all of these things, that all of these ways in which in my life I felt like broken and defective as a wife, as a mother, as a student. And so I was so excited to have that answer. And I remember being so like, just really crushed when I first started telling people that I had been diagnosed with ADHD. And their response was more often than not like, I'm so sorry, as though I had told them I had been, I had a terminal illness. And I was like, no, 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 like, don't you understand how incredible this is? Like that, my sense of self was changing so dramatically as a result of that diagnosis. But it is like, I think unless you're talking to other people who have, one of the kind of spectrum of neurodivergent diagnoses, like people don't really understand what a good, how great it is to have this diagnosis presented to you most of the time, because it really seems like it's a door opening for so many of us.
Yeah, I am. One of the things that I still experience today, and I really, really, it's probably the reason why I do a lot of what I do, is I get sometimes people say, "Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that." But the one which I find even worse is when people go, "No, you don't.
Oh
You don't."
yeah.
That drives me crazy. When people, they just look at me and go, "No, you don't," or "No, I don't buy that," or "I don't believe that," or and I think, how do you not believe it or not know, or and it's just that lack of understanding out there in society. And there's so many misconceptions and misunderstandings, and people buy into all these, all this stigma and all these sort of falsehoods about ADHD. And so they just take a look at you and go, and I actually have had so many people say, how can you have ADHD because you're successful? And people don't believe that if you have ADHD, you could possibly be successful. And I also had a mom who I was talking to who whose son was going through the diagnosis process, and she said, "Well, I still don't think my son can have ADHD because he's smart." And I tried not to take that personally, but you know, that's the thing that really gets me is when I tell someone I have ADHD and they think if I'm smart, I can't have ADHD. If I'm successful, I can't have ADHD. If if I'm not
Anything,
literally dancing
insert
on walls,
anything positive. Yeah.
yeah, but yeah, exactly. And it's and and even my psychiatrist actually, who I try not to see too often, because when he diagnosed me, he actually said, "I'm so shocked you had," because I own two companies, and he said, "I'm so shocked. How can you possibly run a business and be ADHD?" And I just thought, you're a psychiatrist diagnosing people with ADHD. You should not be saying that. Uh, and yeah, that level of misunderstanding runs so deep from the community to professionals to it's so through everything, and it's really heartbreaking. And especially here in Australia, I think it's actually much worse than it is over there in the States, from what I've heard, the sort of level of stigma. um,
I mean, I personally had such a positive experience, both with my therapist sort of, gently suggesting over the years that I look into this, and to then having a really great experience with my diagnosis and my doctor. And it blows my mind hearing the stories from other women, about ways in which they have been minimized by their medical professionals. And, I realize, not every doctor is terrible, but like, gosh, the stories I hear of, exactly what you're saying, either doctors who have said, well, you can't possibly have ADHD because are successful, or did well in school. Or my personal favorites are, you didn't have it as a child and people outgrow it, so you can't possibly, if you weren't diagnosed as a child, you can't possibly have it now. Which blows my mind, because I'm like, no, girls weren't diagnosed. That's the whole point. Nobody saw it. Of course, we weren't diagnosed as children. And then my other favorite is, women who have said, their doctors have said, well, you made it this far. Why do you need the diagnosis? You see, as though it's like, just, keep plugging away, and everything's going to be fine, which also, like, just goes to show how little, not only how little is known about how it manifests and what it looks like in women, but also how important a diagnosis is to moving forward at any age, like at age 80. I mean, it's never too late, I think, to kind of connect these dots and really start radically transforming your, like you said, your sense of self.
I agree. I think it's really sad the amount of the amount of misunderstanding out there, and people sort of go, okay, ADHD, you've got someone who's really hyperactive and can't pay attention to anything ever. And this is the view that people have, and they think if you don't fit that box, therefore you can't possibly be ADHD, or you yeah, something's not right. And they don't see all the other characteristics and all the other things that come with it, and the struggle. And for me, I did terrible at school. I failed school really, really badly. But then as an adult, because school isn't always designed the best way it should be for ADHDers, and then as an adult, when I went back to college and went on to university in the UK, and did really well, and found that that style of learning suited me a lot better. And what sort of always shocked me is just having accommodations made such a difference.
Mhm.
And having at university, I had really great lecturers who really worked with me to help me. And I didn't even have a diagnosis then. I was diagnosed dyslexic, but not ADHD. But they really still just wanted to help me. Whereas at school, it was all about fitting into that exact box and doing it in the way they said I had to do it. And you know and what I do find actually really sad is, so my youngest son, who's, both my kids are ADHD, but my youngest son, who's he's very much like me, and we have very similar things that we struggle with. And I watch him going through school, and he's only 10 at the moment, and his school career is exactly copying mine. And the mistakes that teachers made with me 35 years ago, they're still making with him now. And that breaks my heart that, 3 decades later, and they still can't they're still doing the same thing. It's
Mhm.
like I feel like they haven't learned anything, and they're still making the exact same mistakes.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think it was very emotional for me when I was diagnosed to go back and look through my old report cards, from basically about, about that same age, about 10, 11, 5th grade, in Canada, of just like watching the comments from the teachers and just seeing, my own decline as a student through these years of these comments. And it broke my heart because, yeah, I do see a lot of those issues with my children now. And I'm really grateful that I'm able to kind of put these pieces together and help them and advocate for them, because I understand now how important it is. Like you said, I mean, accommodations are everything. I mean, I was actually just recently having a conversation. Somebody was asking me about, like, do you think there's a difference between the way that, ADHD is experienced in boys and girls, and is there anything like really obviously along gender lines, because I think that's something we talk a lot about, with girls being so commonly um, overlooked in childhood. And I was saying that, like, of all the women I have interviewed, um, I feel like the biggest difference is are women who were diagnosed with some other learning disability as children, like dyslexia or dysgraphia, and they were able to get accommodations through school for those learning disabilities. And it sort of clicked in their mind at a young age that that they weren't the problem, that they just needed a different system, they needed help, they needed special accommodations. And those of us who didn't receive anything, any sort of diagnosis at all, so we internalized that idea that we were the problem, and I think that kind of shapes who you are as you grow up so much, when you realize that, like, no, if we teach our children really, from a young age, that if something isn't working, it's not because it's their fault. They just need to ask for help or figure out, like, what do I need in order for this to work, as opposed to just being, what tends to happen, which is like, well, just try harder. You're not getting it. Figure it out. And then we end up growing up with this, like, intense anxiety and this sort of internalized idea that, like, why am I not figuring it out when everybody else is? What is wrong with me?
Yeah,
So-
absolutely. And I actually grew up I had a lot of problems with anxiety and depression and things like that growing up as a teenager, because of what I now realize was actually was because of me having ADHD and not having my needs met. And it's just really sad that if you have a disability in this life, schools and anywhere else, they try and help, except if you have a hidden disability. And then there's so many people sort of go, no, there's nothing you need help with. And then you've got this battle between the two sides of one side of the coin going, no, you don't need any help. And then the other side of the coin going, oh, poor you can't possibly be successful. And actually, trying to make people, I guess, understand that you can need help and still be successful, because everybody needs help sometimes, and with something, everybody. And just because somebody needs help with certain things some of the time doesn't mean they can't also have all these great things that they can do really well, and be, achieve really good things. And I had someone recently actually say to me, the problem with the neurodiversity movement and the idea that it's just a different brain and all that sort of stuff, is that it means that people won't get the help that they need. And what frustrates me about
Mhm.
that is that actually they should, because if a neurotypical person gets a cold or something, gets ill and they need to go to the doctors, we don't go, oh, you're defective, we don't, you're no good to society, you're less of a person because you had to go and get help for something. And it's no different. I can need help with A, B, and C and still be awesome at D, E, and F.
Mhm.
And I'm not less of a person, I'm just a different person who needs help with different things and can succeed at different things. And trying to get people to understand that just because a brain's different doesn't mean it doesn't deserve help, but it also doesn't mean that it can't be successful either. You know,
Right.
and that's something that I find quite frustrating in people, is that they seem to, think of it's either one way or the other. You're either defective or you don't need help, not.
Yeah, and I think that there is the sense that the need for help is somehow a moral failing, that it really is, you know, it that we are it's like you have to wait until you are absolutely at your wit's end until you ask for help. Otherwise, it's you are, what's the word I'm looking for? Just like it's um I can't think of the word anyway. But that idea that it's we are somehow, better humans if we don't require help, that idea, independence and self-sufficiency are a moral virtue. And this idea of like having the audacity to ask for help, especially if you are already good at other things, feels like almost selfish and self-indulgent. I think in our society, at least we're taught that. And so I think there's a lot to like unpack when it comes to, um, bringing in help, especially for women.
Oh, 100%. And it all starts at such a young age. These kids start school at 4 or 5 years old, or whatever crazy age it is. And from that point, they're taught that you must fit into this box. And if you don't fit into this box, there's something wrong with you. You have to be here. And the school system frustrates me so much with the fact that it's still the same problems. The school system still expects everybody to be, every student, come on in, be the same.
Mhm.
And we're gonna make you do these things, and you need to do them at the pace we tell you, in the way we tell you, and you need to sit still, and you need to do all these things. And and what I think's really sad, I speak to a lot of people from all over the world, and I always hear the same stories, and it doesn't seem to matter what country they live in, they're still having the same problems, which is that the education system hasn't changed in the last 100 years. And it's still making the same mistakes and saying to kids, right, you've all got to come in and you've got to fit in this box. And and ADHDers in particular, I have met some absolutely phenomenal kids and adults with ADHD who could be something so spectacular if they just had a few simple accommodations had been made at school, to help them along the way. And it just breaks my heart. And then, and for girls with ADHD, like me and you, obviously, we don't even get the diagnosis, never mind the accommodations be made half the time. So, it's just heartbreaking.
Yeah. I remember my son recently, he's in fifth grade, and he came home and there was like we were looking over one of his, it was an in-class test, and there was one answer where his answer was just had nothing to do with the question. Like you could tell he was totally just like bullshitting. And, and I said to him, I was like, well, did you even understand what the question was? Because she had asked about like, read the part in italics, and he didn't know what the word italics meant. And so I was like, did you not understand the question? He was like, no, I had no idea what the question was asking. And I said, well, why didn't you raise your hand and ask the teacher? And he was like, well, I didn't want the teacher to think I was dumb. And I'm like, that's what she's there for. I was like, how do we like even begin to kind of unwrap that? I'm like, of course you're 10 years old. You shouldn't be feeling pressure that you can't ask questions because you're worried that your teacher is going to think that you're not smart enough. Like that's the whole point of a teacher is to get you there. But I was
And
just like, oh, it just made me so sad.
Yeah, that was exactly what happened to me through the whole of school, actually. So through the whole of school, they'd give me instructions, and because I was so distractible, I would never hear the instructions. And so
Mm.
when they said go away and get on with the piece of work, I never knew what I was doing. So but I never ever would ever put my hand up and say I don't know what I'm doing, because like many ADHDers, I had that massive fear of judgment and failure and all the rest of it. So
Mhm.
there was no way I'd ever put my hand up and say I don't know what to do. And even to the point, if the teacher came around and said, Rebecca, do you know what to do? I'd go, yeah. I really didn't. didn't have a clue. And so I walked out of school and I was in the bottom groups for everything, so they really thought I was quite dumb. And then I left school and years later I went, right, I'm going to go back to college. And what's interesting, so, I now have a law degree, I have 7 diplomas, and I've got 2 companies. And I didn't grow a brain when I left school. Like, I obviously had one the whole time, but the teachers never it never occurred to them to sort of maybe get to know me and find out if actually I do have a brain, there was something perhaps that they could do to help me. They just assumed I was dumb. And my son, they do the exact same thing with my son now. Like, he's really smart. He rewired every electrical item in our house, and he's 10. Really, really intelligent boy, but he's in the bottom groups just like I was. And when every time I go in for a parent teacher interview, they always say the same thing, that he tries his best, but he's not very good at it. And no matter how many times I say to them, he's really smart, it's the way you're teaching him, they don't, they won't hear it. They won't listen to that. But yeah, it's really sad that kids go through school thinking, like I did, thinking they're dumb, when actually they have every, ability in the world. It's just that the school isn't necessarily teaching them in the way that works for them.
Yeah. Now let's talk about some of your businesses, because you have My Spirited Child, which was originally called My Special Child, and I assume that business grew out of your own kind of mother bear advocacy instinct.
Yeah, so that one, I set that up 7 years ago. Originally, it was just a blog, like, excuse me,
Mm.
just this online blog that I created I just wanted to get information to people that was accurate and and easy to access, sort of thing. So I created this blog, and then I started doing events, and then it kind of just grew and grew and grew. And now we do loads of events here in Australia, and we're actually coming to America next year as well. So we're doing some events over there next year, and I do lots of public speaking, and we have like little guidebooks that we do for teachers and for parents, and so we're kind of, with My Spirited Child, it's all just about getting information to people in whatever way it suits them to have the information, whether it be in a resource or an event or whatever, and just helping parents and educators as well, just to get accurate information that comes from, I guess, someone who not only has the professional side but also the lived experience side. Which, as you really need. You can understand something, but you can't fully understand something unless you live it. So I like to sort of put in a lot of my own stories and things like that. Yeah, so that one was always sort of built as in that side. And then I also have the National PEKE Centre, which is a therapy centre, and that's been going for a year. And I set that up with I have a business partner, Christina Keeble, and we set it up together because it was our dream to change the way therapy was delivered, from something that was so deficit based to something that was strengths based and positive. And so we don't want parents to be like, oh, we've got to go and see his therapist again because there's something wrong with him and they're going to tell me all these problems. We do not, we shouldn't be living in a society that acts like that. And so we wanted people to walk in and and walk out feeling better than they did when they walked in, feeling like positive and strong and empowered, and know that their kids can do well, and we'll be there, sure, to help them with the things they struggle with. But more importantly than that, we're there to build them up and tell them, make them feel good about themselves. And all our therapists, their primary goal is to build connection and teach all these kids and adults that they're awesome and they can do anything they want, and they'll help them to get there. And so we're going to build that up and hopefully eventually just change the way the system is, so that therapy centres that are very deficit based and all about, there's something wrong with your kid and stuff like that, we can hopefully move away from that and start them on a sort of more positive approach.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Now, does peak is PEKE? I had a lot of trouble with that one. Is that an acronym for something?
No, so we spent a very long time trying to figure the name, and eventually we thought every time we used a word, like with my special child, I had to move it to spirited because special became not a word that was acceptable anymore,
Mhm.
which is fine. So, and spirited summed it up better anyway. But we didn't want to use a word that where the name was going to change. So we didn't want to say ADHD or autism or anything like that because names change and words change. And we went, do you know what? We'll call it. So my surname's Perkins and my business partner's surname's Keeble. So we just took the first two letters of each word and put it together. And we realized that that also, when you think about the peak and somebody reaching the top and doing well, and it kind of all fit. So yeah, that's where peak came from.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. All right. Well, I love that. Um, and I love, honestly, that's sort of the trajectory I think of women in ADHD, which was it sort of started out as this podcast. Um, and it was a selfish endeavor really to just sort of hear other women's stories and to find out if other women were having the same experience as me, but then it sort of morphed really into learning about what this looks like and the many different way, because it's so difficult to articulate to other people what ADHD even is when once you've started to connect the dots in your own life. And so right now, I feel like it's so much more about finding the community and finding each other and building a community because knowing that we're not alone and knowing that we're not quote unquote broken and that there are so many other people like us who have very similar experiences is part of the treatment as far as I'm concerned. Like, just really knowing that we are not alone, and whether that's not alone as mothers who are struggling and the things that we're struggling with, or as partners, as women, or as entrepreneurs, business owners. I mean, I feel like it's so important to find each other. And so that now is kind of morphing into the next phase, which I think will probably be more event, bringing people together in events. So I love listening to the kind of trajectory of your career, starting out as a mom with a blog, because that's like such an ADHD story, right? Where you're just sort of like, oh, and by the way, I love that I was on your website where you're like, oh, I should probably mention I have a law degree. You're just sort of like all of the different certifications and degrees and everything that we pile up over the years, where you're like, oh yeah, I did that for a while and now I'm doing this. Oh yes, I was a teacher.
Do you know what? It's such a typical ADHD thing. Is there's all these people who think ADHDers can't do anything, they can't achieve anything, and I'm like the opposite, the absolute opposite. ADHD people with ADHD are prone to achieve way more because they just don't stop, and they're like, oh, I'll do this now, and I'll do that now, and I'll do this now. And sometimes when I tell people about my career, they go, how can you possibly have done all that? Because I'm 43 now. And they go, how have you managed to fit all that in? And I have no idea. I just do this and then I do that, and and yeah, it's just a typical ADHD story, I think. And I truly believe people with ADHD are more likely to be successful because they have all the things that make someone successful. They're very competitive and really what's the word, they really want to achieve and do well, and they're very
Insatiable,
successful.
yeah.
Yeah, and then at the same time they're very intuitive. I think people with ADHD tend to have a really good intuition of other people's feelings, so they're able to read people quite well. And on top of that, they have the ability to hyper focus on something they're interested in, whilst also being able to really sort of go, I want to get this done, and plowing straight into something. And they're so ambitious, and you mix all of that together, and you're literally destined to have someone who's successful as long as they get support. And I think I'm very lucky because I have a very supportive mom who always built me up and always believed I could achieve anything. And I think as long as when right back when they're kids, they have that support and that someone building them up, that, or even later in life, at some point somebody has to be behind them and say, you can do it. And as long as they have that faith in themselves to be able to do it, it's amazing what they can achieve. Um, And I really kind of hope that with a lot of um, doing, sort of getting the information out there and providing this sort of information to people, we can eventually get to a point where all parents, teachers, everybody who has or works with a child with ADHD has the knowledge and understanding and ability to go, this is an amazing kid. All they need is my support and my me being behind them to build them up and help them with those challenges so that they then can achieve it. And you end up with these kids who end up going into world leaders and owning massive corporations and huge foundations and charities because they're just built for that, and we thrive so much off success. I meet a lot of ADHDers who really struggle in their jobs as adults, and they find it very difficult. And uh, and I think often with the right support and someone sort of saying to them, "You can do it," they can go out, work for themselves, create their own thing, and build something that they love, and just be so successful doing it.
Yeah, I certainly fall into that category of not being able to stick with a job longer than 2 years for most of my 20s and 30s and wondering what was wrong with me. Um, but it's true, like there are ways in which if we are the square peg trying to jam into the round hole, there are ways in which we do feel like failures all the time. And so you could say, well, my ADHD means I'm a failure, as opposed to kind of stepping back and being like, what systems do you have in place right now that are failing you? And I think, yeah, there are so many ways in which we can reframe all of the things in our lives and really kind of figure out what our strengths are and lean into them and just go for it. I'm sure it's terrifying in theory, but it really, I think we need it. I think it feeds us in a way. It's almost like, trying to, I feel like there's like a movie character, somebody who was like being forced to be working in the mines, and it reminds me of the analogy of the hunters versus the farmers, right? And that idea of like you can't force yourself to be anything other than you are, and we're
Yeah,
very
absolutely.
stubborn.
Oh, yes.
I do want to ask you a little bit more about your own experience with ADHD, but I had a question that I had written down because I saw that you and your partner had been speaking about ADHD and demand avoidance, and that was a term I actually hadn't heard. And so I was Googling it and was looking at more, and can you tell me a little bit more about that from like a parent point of view of what demand avoidance is and how that differs from something like oppositional defiance disorder, which is what a lot of kids with ADHD end up getting also sort of comorbidly uh, diagnosed with?
Yeah, so demand avoidance. You have demand avoidance and then pathological demand avoidance. I hate that term, pathological, but that's what it's called. Pathological demand avoidance is actually a subtype under the autism bracket. However, it's very new. Studies really started in the UK only probably 4 years ago. So it's very in the very early stages of research, but there's a lot of research out there about it, and it's only starting to now spread to the rest of the world. Now, my personal belief, and speaking to a lot of PDA experts as well, is that although at the moment it's just categorized as a subtype of autism, I actually think it applies to a lot of people with ADHD, and I would be one of those people. So I personally, I'm not autistic, but I'm definitely demand avoidant, and I think a lot of kids out there who are diagnosed with ODD, in actual fact, would probably fit the demand avoidant bracket
Mm.
instead. Or for a lot of them, I actually think they just have ADHD, but the diagnosticians didn't understand enough about ADHD to realize that those some of the things they were doing were sort of ADHD characteristics. But demand avoidance is exactly what it says on the tin, sort of thing. It's when a child really struggles to take demands, and a good example would be if you've got a child who in their brain much like if you've got slow processing speeds or anxiety or things, anything going on up there, and you, because for whatever reason your brain doesn't have the capacity to be able to deal with more expectations being placed on you. Now when it becomes a problem for a child, where it becomes a neurotype and it's something they do all the time, it means that their brain literally just can't tolerate demands. They're not being naughty, they're not just, it's not a choice. They just can't cope with demands because their brain doesn't have the capacity to handle them. And so it can be when someone's demand avoidant, you can ask them to do something they actually want to do, but because it was given to them in the form of a demand, they can't do it. So that's how to tell, because obviously if you ask someone to do something they want to do, usually they happily do it. But when someone's demand avoidant, they still can't take the demand, even if it's something they want to do. And obviously in life there's times when growing up it's developmentally appropriate to be demand avoidant. You know, your toddlers tend to do it anyway, but what you're sort of looking for is it's not one of those times when it's appropriate for their age, and they're still doing it, and they're doing it even when it's things that they would actually ordinarily like to do. And it fluctuates as well, because on, like with any condition or neurotype, you have good days and bad days. So some days they may be able to handle a few demands, some days they won't be able to handle any. And the difference between, you know, standard demand avoidance and pathological demand avoidance is just the extremity of how severe it is. So if someone has pathological demand avoidance, they're really going to not be able to take any demand placed on them. And what you end up with is what looks like behavior, and it's not behavior, it's not something that's chosen. It could be something like, you could say to them, pass me that glass that's right next to them at the time. You think that's a perfectly reasonable request because the glass is right there, but they can't do it, and they end up having a meltdown rather than pass the glass, because in their mind, in that type, they haven't, in that moment, they have no capacity to process that demand. And so it's such a challenge for their brain to go, hang on, I need to pick up this glass, it's that whole thing just sends them into very extreme anxiety, and they can end up in a meltdown. So it's and demand avoidance, I think there's a lot of ADHDers who have a degree of demand avoidance. I know I do. I really struggle with, I can take demands, but if someone asks in the wrong way, and this is a very demand avoidant thing, if someone asks in a not necessarily a nice way, but sort of starts demanding, and you know, and asking in a very I don't know, sharp or harsh or not such a sweet and polite way, I really struggle to take those demands. And so I kind of think I have an element of demand avoidance.
Yeah, and
And
that's, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, it was, well, interestingly, someone once said to me, a practitioner once said to me, I think you might have ODD as well. But I, having done the research, I don't think I have ODD. I do think I have demand avoidance, though.
Yeah, I'm fascinated with the sort of comparison of the two, because I always felt like when I think back about to my childhood, I probably would have been diagnosed with ODD if they knew that that existed, because I realize now that like I had a really hard time with transitions. And so I would often kind of have outbursts, especially in the classroom, when the teacher was like, now we're going to stop coloring and move on to the, you know, I was the kid who would have, you know, get flipped into a rage if I had to stop something before it was done. And I was also the one, you know, and I've seen like so many ADHD memes about that, you know, it's like, I was going to do something, but then you told me to do it, and now I'm absolutely not doing that thing because you told me to do it. I'm like, yeah, that rings true for me as well. And like you said, like it's almost in sort of the tone, or if there's some way in which you're feeling condescended to.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so interesting how that plays in with our you know, it's like it's an attention issue, but it's also a hyper focus transition issue, and then it's also kind of almost like a sensory issue in terms of the um the feedback that you're getting when you don't want it. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
The ADHD brain is so complex, and one of the things when I do a lot of public speaking over here, and one of the things I always say is, you know, ADHD is so much more complex than what many people understand, including a lot of the physicians who are diagnosing it. And when you look at demand avoidance, even though at the moment it is purely researched as a subtype of autism, 100%. I'm absolutely convinced that give it another 5 or 10 years and they'll start realizing that a lot of ADHDers also struggle with demand avoidance, because I think more ADHDers struggle with that than what don't. And I know I'm definitely one of them. It's
Mhm.
uh, it's very hard, and it's not conscious. It's not we don't purposely go, I'm not going to do that thing, but something in our brain goes, nope. Nope, you just asked me in the wrong way. I can't do it. I don't know why that is, but yeah, there's something there that just cuts it off if it's asked wrong.
Right. And we wonder why we feel like our brain, I posted recently about how like people with ADHD talk about their brains like in the third person, as though it's this awful roommate that we live with that's so unpredictable, and we never know if it's gonna pay the rent. And sometimes it plays loud music when you're trying to sleep. Like, but we have a tendency to like separate ourselves from our own brains because it's so unpredictable, and that sense of like, I don't know, this worked for me last time, it's not working this time, or like I woke up this morning feeling like I was going to accomplish things, and then my brain had other plans.
Yeah, and so one of the things I would say to parents, and actually I did a professional development in a school last week, and I asked it was 150 teachers, and I said to them, put your hand up if you believe that consistency is key to helping kids with ADHD, and they all, except for two of them, put their hands up and were like, really proud of themselves because they'd all agreed, and I sort of said, the whole myth of being consistent is so false when it comes to ADHD, because even neurotypical people, everyone has good days and bad days. But for an ADHDer, some days they'll be able to do this, this, and this because their brains, really switched on that day and working that little bit better. But another day, they might have had not enough sleep, they might be hungry, they might be tired, they might be thirsty, they might have anxiety because something might have happened to them the night before, whatever, and they just can't achieve the things that they could achieve on a different day, and they can't take the demands they could take on a different day, and they might be more easily pushed into a meltdown than they would the day before. And so with those kids, we can't be consistent. We have to be prepared to be flexible based on their level of need on a particular day, because it actually doesn't matter if you're ADHD or not. Every brain has good days and bad days. But for an ADHD, I know for myself, on a good day, I'm really focused and I can do really well. And on a bad day, like yesterday, I couldn't focus on anything. I was all over the place yesterday. And so I just think it's really interesting that so many people think consistency is so important, but actually we need
Well,
flexibility more than consistency.
absolutely. I mean, it's drilled into us from the moment we start school, and just even the grading system, and this idea that like the best students are the ones who get straight A's is such a fallacy, because it's like again, why on earth would you expect somebody to be good in every single subject? Um,
Yeah.
and they're just playing the game, right? And a typical ADHD report card has 5 A's and 5 D's. And that's fine. That's the other thing. Like, I feel like but when that's your report card, your teachers say things to you like more consistency is needed, and you need to bring your grades up in these other subjects. And I was like, why would I want to bring my grade up in that subject when I'm focusing on this other subject I love? But
Yeah.
that's
And
another soapbox.
well, yeah, we don't all end up with 12 careers. We end up with one. So why we need to do so well in every single topic when we're clearly not going to end up working in every single topic?
Yeah. Now, so I want to ask you more about um, the PEKE Center, but I guess the one question I ask all of my guests is if you could rename ADHD to something else, because that acronym is so problematic, and we don't, like you said, we don't have a deficit of anything, uh, and the term disorder I think can be really misleading, and also the hyperactivity element can be so misleading for women. I certainly did not think I had ADHD because I didn't identify as somebody who was hyperactive, and so that was a real barrier for me. So I'm curious if you could name it something else. Do you have an idea of what you might name it?
Yes, so I have lots of problems with the name, aside from the fact I don't think a single word in it is applicable or correct. And I also have a problem with the fact that it's named after its apparent symptoms, which aren't even correct. But it's not, we don't call dyslexia reading and writing disorder. Why? I don't feel like, why is it named after characteristics? Nothing else is. But if I could rename it, there's a word in Latin which is animosa, and animosa in Latin means spirited. And so if I could rename it, I would rename it animosa, because I think it's a nice word. It's not a list of symptoms, and it actually means something that's relevant, because I've never met an ADHD person who in one form or another isn't spirited. So that
I
would be.
love that. Ah, that's so wonderful. I got shivers from the goosebumps from that, just thinking about like because I feel like animosa also has this sense of like soul, like there's a sense of like your essence, that is so, oh, what a lovely word. Yeah, definitely. Oh, I love that. Let's go for it. I'll start rallying for that one.
Yes, well, yeah, I'll start rallying over this side of the pond in Australia. See if we can. I've heard so many options, but most options are just other lists of symptoms. And
Right.
because ADHD has so many characteristics, you couldn't possibly cover them all. And because you can't cover them all, any list of symptoms or characteristics creates problems, because people automatically will confine it to that
Mhm.
and not think of anything outside of that. And so it was actually years ago, I always talk about how much I hate the name. And then many years ago, someone said to me, well, what would you call it? And I said, actually, I don't know. And they said, well, don't you think if you're saying how much you hate the name, you should think of a different option? And I created, and I spent a long time thinking about that. And I first thought, right, it's got to be a word. It can't be a list of characteristics. It's got to be a word, and it's got to be a relevant word. And I didn't want it to be an English word, because I thought, well, it needs to be something that's special, because I think people with ADHD are just awesome, unique individuals. And I wanted to have a word that was equally awesome and equally unique. So um, eventually that's what I came up with. But I think it's really appropriate for ADHDers. And it fit.
Absolutely. Oh, I love it. Okay, you came prepared. Okay. um, so now how can people find you and work with you? I know you have a ton of, you've done so much public speaking. So I know even just putting your name into YouTube search bar comes up with so many wonderful presentations you've given. But how can people find more of you and your partner and work with you or come to some of your upcoming events?
Yeah, so we at the moment we run all the ADHD events pretty much in Australia, and I'm at most of them. So if anyone's in Australia, I'm pretty easy to find. In the US next year, we're doing a world tour which starts next year, of the ADHD and demand avoidance tour, actually. So if anybody wants to know more about ADHD and demand avoidance, and we talk a lot about, it's a whole day, and we really go in depth with strategies and information, and that will be in 4 places in America next year. I know it's New York and LA, and I can't remember where the other 2 places are off the top of my head, but we'll definitely be visiting New York, LA, and a couple of other places in the States. And then the rest of the world will be doing the year after. So I'm really excited to do that. If people want to email me, our email address is admin@myspiritedchild.com. So that's pretty easy to get hold of, and I'm always happy to sort of answer questions. And our website is just myspiritedchild.com. And there's loads of hopefully useful, interesting stuff on there and resources and that sort of thing.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Oh, that's so exciting. I will definitely look out for it. I'm in New York, so hopefully we'll be much more mobile next year. Uh, I've become such a
Yeah.
hermit the last 2 years of lockdown. It's like, but yeah, I'm so excited to be able to go to live events again, and absolutely. So can I get on a newsletter and sign up through
Yes.
your website to get on your newsletter to find out what the dates are and everything?
Yeah, so the newsletter's on the front page. You can on the front page, you scroll down a bit, and it says subscribe to the newsletter. And in the newsletter, we do have lots of really good information and strategies and deals and all sorts that go out on that. But we also let everyone know every time there's new events coming up and things. But yeah, we'll definitely be in New York. So I really hope to see you. You can come along and find out more about demand avoidance. But it's going to be really exciting. I've never been to America, so I'm really excited to get started with that and get to see some places that I've not been to and meet lots of people. That's my favorite part of my job, is meeting people. So I'm looking forward to doing that.
That's yeah. Oh, that's so wonderful. It's amazing. And yeah, very inspiring too, I guess, as I kind of look ahead as to where I want to expand with women in ADHD and having more of these opportunities to kind of advocate and spread awareness and bring community together. So that's so wonderful. Thank you. I'm so pleased to have met you, and really thank you for your time, and thank you so much for all the amazing work you're doing in Australia and internationally as well.
Oh, thank you for having me. It was really nice speaking to you today. I've really enjoyed chatting to someone over, in a different country, and it's night time where you are and morning here. And yeah, it's really great.
Awesome. All right. Okay, well, thank you, Rebecca. I'll be in touch.
Great. I'll speak to you soon, hopefully.
Okay, have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.